do a bunch of talking, go somewhere else and talk, not in here. Because otherwise I keep talking louder and louder and louder, and that's not good for my voice. So anyway, most of us would think about Native Americans. Well, anymore, so what's even the proper term? What do you call somebody without upsetting them? You know, used to be they're called Indians, because when Columbus came across the ocean in 1492, he met people he thought was an Indian. So they got the name Indians. Well, now some people don't like the term Indians, so some people say Native Americans. Now some say, oh no, we call indigenous people. Well, here's the strange thing. The word indigenous and native mean the exact same thing. So what's the difference? I used to work out in a state called Oklahoma. And the word Oklahoma means land of the red man. And some say, well, you can't say that. You can't call them the red people. I didn't. Guess who formed the word Oklahoma? Choctaw Indians. They call themselves the red people. Not because their skin was red, okay, but because in ceremonies and in war, they'd paint themselves red. It's kind of like, to be honest, I don't watch sports. They got rid of sports on TV, I'd be a happy camp, they put more news on there, more science or something. I don't watch them. But I do know that there's some people who are crazy about sports. Like if you're in Ann Arbor, you probably don't want to wear green and white. If you're in East Lansing, you probably don't want to wear blue and gold. And I do every once in a while get to see people on TV at the sporting events, and some are they're painting themselves green and white. Other things themselves blue and gold. So those are the blue and gold people. These are the green and white people. Well, Native Americans paint themselves red in some parts of North America. So they're called the red people. That's what they call themselves. But not so much here in Michigan. Because to paint themselves red, they took a very soft rock that was red, ground into a red powder, and then they mixed it with this stuff right here. This stuff's got more uses than duct tape. It's amazing stuff. It's bear fat. It's the fat of a dead bear. Now you mix that fat with that ground up red powder, and you paint yourself. So now you become red. Well, in Michigan, we don't have that rock called ochre. So they would paint themselves black. So in different parts of the country, we had different colored people, depending basically on how they painted themselves. But nonetheless, today most people agree indigenous people are Native Americans. When I used to work in Oklahoma, the newspapers, in one paragraph, they're talking about the Native Americans. The very next sentence, they call themselves Indians. Next time, they just call themselves the people. Okay. And most of us, though, when we think about Native Americans or Indians, we tend to think about how they were living 300, 400, 500 years ago. Once Columbus came to North America and others came, they met the people, they took notes, they drew pictures of them, their houses, their canoes, all kinds of things. We have a good written history. But here's the problem. Native Americans didn't show up here in Michigan 400 or 500 years ago, 10 to 12,000 years ago. And nobody had pictures, nobody had cameras, they didn't have written language. We know very little about them. We do know they hunted some creatures, especially in southern Michigan, that don't exist anymore. They hunted the creature that this came from. This is part of a great big hairy elephant-like creature that used to live right here in Michigan. Now, we had two types of elephant-like creatures. Anybody know the name of one of those elephant-like creatures that used to live right here in Michigan?
Woolly mammoth.
Woolly mammoth, very good. That's probably the most famous one. They traveled in big herds, looked like a hairy elephant, ate primarily grasses. This is part of the other one, called a mastodon. The biggest difference, they eat trees. More like an African elephant, eating primarily tree branches and limbs and things like that. Now this particular mastodon, and this is part of the tusk, that big long white thing. This animal was probably somebody's dinner. This animal did not die of old age. Didn't die right after born like a lot of people, like a lot of animals do. It died at age 13 and it died suddenly. Believe it or not, scientists can tell all that from this little piece of bone. Now, how do we know it? If you look close, you might notice something. There's little circles in here. Those are growth rings. And there are rings in their teeth when they grow, just like trees do. And a tusk is a kind of tooth. So this is part of a mastodon. Died at age 13. If he had been sick, he would not have been growing fast. the last two rings would be close together. Since they're far apart, we know this animal was growing fast until the day he died. Therefore, something killed him. Suddenly. Now, there were no cars that hit him back then. There were trains that hit him back then. The most likely chance, a human. Now here's the problem. You've got these elephants that weigh 12, 13,000 pounds. We're talking the size of 2 or 3 small cars. They can run 20, 30 miles an hour. You can't. So how do you kill this great big creature? And I don't know how many museums I've gone to, and they got a picture of some guy standing with a spear, and a great big mastodon's there, like yeah. You really think they're that dumb to go after 10, 12,000 animal with a spear? I go to Kenya, Africa. They got big elephants over there. Guess what? I don't see any native people or hear records of them standing there taking off a big elephant. No, you're not that dumb. You gotta be smarter than the elephant, not faster. You find they hunt mastodons and mammoths in Michigan, primarily late fall, early winter. Okay? They waited for the lakes to start to freeze. Now what they would do, they'd chase these big elephant-like animals down to what are called bog lakes. Bog lakes have a lot of dead plants in them. And plants sticking out of the ice at the edge. That absorbs energy from the sun. It keeps the ice kind of thin. And since it's early winter, the ice is really thin. So you chase them down to the edge of a bog lake. They don't know the ice is thin. They step on it, they panic, now they fall through. Now instead of going 20 or 30 miles an hour, they're going 3. A Native American would go 3 miles an hour. And you spear him, you kill him. Now you got this great big dead animal, weighs 12, 13,000 pounds. What do you do with the meat? There are no refrigerators. If you leave it on land, it'll freeze. And if it freezes, how do you carve it up? I mean, these are the kinds of tools you have. And these are actual tools. These are actual knives. This one's not so old. This one's only about 600 years old. This one I found up in the Arctic. I have no idea how old that one is. But these are the kinds of tools you'd have to carve that frozen meat. That's impossible. So you want the meat cold enough where it won't spoil, but warm enough where it won't freeze. And here's the tricky part. How do you keep it from spoiling for the next 6 months? I can't even keep meat in my refrigerator for 6 months without it spoiling. But these people, humans just like us, figured it out. There's a place you put the meat where it will not spoil. You put it at the bottom of the lake. But it has to be a bog lake. You put the meat at the bottom of most lakes, it's going to rot. Bog lakes have so many dead plants in them, there's no oxygen. Without oxygen, things don't rot very fast. So you put it at the bottom of the lake. Oh, bog lakes. The water looks like tea. There's so many plants in it. If you ever make tea, make it too strong, it gets kind of bitter tasting. The bitterness is a chemical called tannin. Guess what it does? It kills bacteria. I had a bad tooth a few years ago. Went to the dentist, it happened to be a holiday weekend. Said, well, if you run out of antibiotics before I get back from the holidays, just put a tea bag on it. Well, guess what? There's so many dead plants in a bog lake, there's no oxygen, and then the tannin kills the bacteria. Meat will literally last for months. So they store it at the bottom of the lakes. Now here's the problem. You chop a hole in the ice, you put the meat in here, it's going to float. So you got to make it sink. You put rocks on it, you're going to go to the bottom. Hopefully you're smart enough to tie a rope to it first. Okay? Now, you don't go to Walmart or Myers or Home Depot and buy the rope. You got to make it. Usually out of tree bark. Basswood makes a good rope. There's your rope. Now you tie that around your meat, you put the rock on it, down it goes, you go to pull it up and your rope breaks. The rock was too heavy. They didn't use rocks. They used part of the mastodon. They used sections of intestine about that long. Tied a rope around one end, filled full of sand, gravel, whatever was heavy, tied a rope on the other end, put that on top of it. And down it would go, it would sink. Intestine, when it's wet, is very slippery. You pull it up, the intestine slides off, and you've got your meat. Professors at the University of Michigan figured this out. They'd go to a bog lake, find little patches of sand or rocks where they shouldn't really be in the middle of a bog. They figured out how they stored the meat. They tried it. They kept beef, cow meat, good for 6 months. So it didn't taste real good, but it wasn't rotten. So that's where they stored the meat. Now, this was thousands of years ago. By the time we think of Native Americans 100 years ago, mastodons were dead. What happened to them?
Overhunting.
They probably killed and ate too many. We say, oh no, Native Americans never killed and eat too much of anything. Oh yes, they would. Do you really think they had the luxury of looking at that big animal and saying, well, maybe I ought to save that one for next year? Yeah, we'll all starve this year, but we left it alone. No, they didn't know if there were 30 more over the next hill or if there were none. We find everywhere in the world where human populations grow, the first animals to disappear, to become extinct, are the large animals. Why? Because humans are smart, everywhere in the world. I go deer hunting. 2 deer step up, a big one and a little one. And which one am I going to shoot? I'm going to shoot the big one. Doesn't taste good, he's tougher, but I get more meals for my effort. Now, if just the little one steps out, I'll take the little one. A few meals are better than no meals. Well, that's what they did. They always take the biggest animals first because it provides more for your family. Now, this was thousands of years ago. Now we're moving to modern times, 400 or 500 years ago. 400 or 500 years ago, right where you're living was a group of Indians called the Kickapoo. Our students in schools almost never hear about the Kickapoo. They always learn about the Ottawa, the Potawatomi, and the Ojibwa. Okay, they called them the 3 fighters. They were the newcomers. They're the ones that won the wars against the other tribes that used to be here before they showed up. Right here used to be the Kickapoo. And then right here, after that, once the French showed up in the 1600s, guess what? It was the Huron, also known as the Wyandot. They might have walked across your backyard one day. They lived right here. You hear of a town called Saginaw? He's home of the Sauk and the Fox. Again, we almost hear nothing about them. Because the Ojibwa came in and wiped most of them out. Survivors were forced to move to Wisconsin. So we always hear about the winners, the winning tribes. We don't hear about the losing tribes. We have wars around the world today. They have wars right here. Seems like happens everywhere in the world, you know. Native Americans are no different. Now, we think of Native Americans, now, by now the mastodon were extinct, but there's an animal that provides everything the Native Americans need here. It's like a grocery store on feet. You got food from it, you got medicine from this creature, clothing, thread, sewing needles, fish hooks, equivalent to plastic bags, let's see, musical instruments, bow and arrows, fire starting kits, snowshoes, games, like Walmart on feet. And this creature still lives in Michigan. Anybody have an idea what animal could be so important to the native people that they could provide all that? One species of animal can provide all of that.
The bear.
Bear would give you most of it. Bear would give you most of it. And by the way, originally there were more bear back then than the animal I'm talking about.
Beaver.
A beaver was very important, but not providing everything. It was the creature that provided this right here, deer, the white-tailed deer. Now this is deer skin. Okay. If you want to see what it feels like by the way, you can. Now the deer provide all those things for the Native Americans. But there's a problem. We only had deer in about the southern half of Michigan. Okay, deer don't like big forests. Originally, Michigan was mostly forest. We didn't have a lot of deer. In southern Michigan, natives would burn some of the forest. They made openings. And so we did have deer in southern Michigan. Northern Michigan was so hard to survive in, very few tribes lived in northern Michigan, mostly in the south. But the deer provide all of those things. Now, this also limited their population. Because Michigan, if you haven't noticed, gets cold in the winter, doesn't it? Which means you need clothing. Here's your clothing. Now, to provide clothing, it takes a lot of deer. And here's why their villages were normally small, 25 or 30 adults plus children. Let's say I want to make a set of clothing. And this, by the way, this is a huge deer. This is bigger than average, far bigger than average. If I want to have clothing, I kill one deer for this leg. I kill a second deer for this leg. A third deer for what's called a loincloth. A fourth deer gives me a front to a shirt. Fifth deer gives me a back to a shirt. Sixth deer gives me a sleeve. Seventh deer gives me the other sleeve. Average is 7 deer to make one set of clothes. Now if we do a little bit of math, if we have 30 adults in a village, everybody needs 7 deer. How many deer do we have to kill?
210.
210. For one set of clothes. Most Native Americans own 2 sets of clothes. That's 420. Now this is just for the grown-ups. We still need clothing for children. We need animal skins for snowshoes, games, other uses. To supply a village of just 30 adults with all the deer they need for everything, they have to kill over 1,000 deer a year for a group of just 30. That's not always easy to come by. And some years they didn't do it. And by the way, if you own 2 sets of clothes, guess what? You don't wear them very often. When the French first arrived in Michigan in 1600, they described the people as primarily naked. And why would you wear them if you don't need to? You wear them every day, they don't last. You wear them when necessary. Now, on that, by the way, they didn't even give moccasins for their feet. I thought I had a moccasin here. Oh, maybe it ran away. Their shoes, they didn't last. If you make a pair of moccasins out of deer skin, they're lucky to last you a week. They went barefoot most of the time, even quite often in snow. They were known to be barefoot. They wore moccasins only when necessary. They just don't last. Now, if you want to make your clothing out of deer skins, you need thread. You need a sewing needle. Guess what? It came from the deer as well. You take a bone. You can get a bone like this. This part of a foot bone. There's where the toes used to be. And you smash it with a rock. And you get little splinters. You get little pieces. And there's your sewing needle. All made from the bone. You got the skin from the deer. You got the bone sewing needle from the deer. And guess what? You also have your thread from the deer. There's thread. This is called sinew. Now it's kind of a fat thread. But you can do something with this. This is from a deer I killed last year. You take this sinew and you twist it. You twist it and guess what? It separates into fibers. Now I have my thread. So I take this thread and I wrap it around my sewing needle. That's it. Take my thread, I wrap it around my sewing needle. Well, hang on. Do this a little bit. Okay. But here's the problem. If I take my sewing needle and I try to shove it through this deer skin, it's probably going to break. It's pretty thin. So before you sew leather, you always poke a hole first. Where do you get the tool for that? From the deer. You have what's called an awl. The same bone I showed you earlier has a point on it. It's a little thicker, less likely to break. So you always take an awl first. You poke your hole through here. You get all your holes made first. Then you use your more delicate sewing needle. And that's how they sew it. Now, to be honest, quite often they would take this, and the women learn to braid these together, make them longer and longer and longer. And this is amazingly strong. This sinew is so tough, I can't break it with my fingers. It will cut my fingers before I can break it. It is very, very strong stuff. You braid 2 or 3 of these together, you can catch a 60-pound fish without breaking. So this is how they sewed their clothing. Now, first of all, we're talking about sewing the skins together. But when you get an animal skin, it doesn't look like this. It's got all the hair on it, first of all. You gotta get rid of that. That's not easy. So how do you get rid of it? There's 2 ways. If you're in a hurry, you kill your deer, and this is a beaver skin actually, but if you kill your deer, and you stretch it nice and tight, and you would scrape all the hair off. That's a lot of work. Like us. Why do more work than you have to? There's a much easier way. You simply take the deer skin, you throw it into a stream or river, let it sit there for 2 weeks. The bacteria will make the hair fall off. It's a little smellier, but it's a whole lot easier. And everyone likes an easier life. So if you're not in a hurry, you got a question.
Why did that the hair on for more warmth?
It depends. You don't want, we wear winter clothes and summer clothes, okay? They would live like us. Layering is better than having solid. They would sometimes have another coat over it in the wintertime, okay? But the summer clothes, you don't want the hair on it, okay? And deer hair especially is a problem. Beaver hair is tough, it'll hang on here. I can make a coat, it'll keep the hair. Deer hair is very brittle. And you get a beautiful deer skin. And some guys, oh, I have it tanned, I have a deer skin rug. You do not want a deer skin rug. Because you'll have hair for a week. And for the next 6 months, you're cleaning up the hair around your house. Because it all breaks, it's very brittle, it breaks off. So yeah, the deer skin, you couldn't leave the hair on, it's too brittle. Okay? Beaver skin, you could. Okay? But they would scrape the hair off and then go to sew it together. So you would scrape it. But originally, you would take that hair, scrape it off, then stretch your skin and let it dry. You get this stuff right here. You can see how thin it is. That's a deer skin. It's as thin as a piece of paper. It's called rawhide. If you want to see what it feels like, by the way, you can. It's called rawhide. Nothing has been done to it except the hair has been removed. Now today we quite often feed rawhide to dogs. Here, go ahead and have something to chew on. I got news for you. They didn't waste rawhide on their dogs. If the dog wasn't careful, it might be made into rawhide. Yeah, dogs, by the way, were considered a delicacy. If you show up at an Indian village, you travel a great distance, they didn't offer you dog for a meal, you might want to leave while you still can. It means they didn't like you. They thought you always give the best gift to the guest. And since they like their dogs, like we like our dogs, it would be major sacrifice to give up a dog to a guest. And if they didn't give it to you, I mean, they didn't like you. That was a good indication you're not welcome here. Anyhow, rawhide. I turn this into leather a couple of ways. One, I can throw it in a puddle with oak leaves, tree leaves, black walnut, leave it there for 4 or 5 weeks, and I'll have leather. That's nice, tough leather for moccasins, for shoes. But I want my shirt to be a little softer than my shoes. I mean, this would be a little uncomfortable for a shirt. So guess what? There's a much easier way to make soft leather. You get a big buffalo skin or some other animal skin, dig a hole in the ground, shove it into the ground. Then you take the deer you just killed, you take the brains out of it, you throw it into the little hole in the ground, add a little bit of water, stir it up. It looks like cream of mushroom soup, by the way. And every time I see cream of mushroom soup, I think of brain panning. You take your rawhide, you throw it on in, let it soak for a day, you take it out, and you don't have leather. That'd be too easy. No. You throw it in there, take it out, and you take your skin that's all wet, full of brains and so on, and you twist it, and you wring it all, and you save it, of course, don't waste it. And you tug, and you pull, and you tug, and you pull. You think your arm's gonna fall off. Throw it back in. Soak up more deer brains in water. Tug and pull. And the more you tug and the more you pull, the softer your clothing. Now if you're lazy, it's not gonna be very soft. You're the one walking around sore armpits. You can't blame it on somebody else, you made it yourself. Work hard, soft, comfortable clothes. Lazy, uncomfortable clothes. And there's an advantage to this kind of brain tanning instead of using oak leaves and oak bark. If you're starving, you can't eat leather made with oak leaves and oak bark. It's poisonous because of all the tannin. You can eat this if you're starving. And there's records of Native Americans in the upper Peninsula getting so hungry, they resorted to eating their clothes. March in Michigan was always considered the month of death. All the berries you collected last fall, all the acorns, all the nuts, they've been eaten up now for a couple of weeks. All the meat you stored, gee, I ran out a couple weeks ago. No fish running up the rivers yet. No new foods. March was a deadly month, okay? However, in March, something else did happen. The sap starts to run up the trees. And you can drill a hole inside of a maple tree, collect the sap, looks like water, and you boil it and you boil it. And eventually you end up with syrup. Nice maple syrup. Let it sit long enough, and you get maple sugar. This is sugar that I made from the trees in my yard. Okay? Now, we all like sugar, don't we? Well, guess what? So did they. Sugar was a very important commodity. It was used to buy other things from other tribes, especially further south, where the type of maple trees don't exist. So if you're an Indian down in Florida, some Ojibwe Indian from Michigan comes down to visit, he brings sugar with him. Say, here, you've never had sugar before? Here, try this stuff. Man, I'll tell you what, the Native Americans in the American South gave our Indians all kinds of stuff for the sugar they brought. If you have lots of sugar, it's a good economy. But some years the trees don't make as much sugar. Only have enough for your own use. That's a bad economy. Believe it or not, here in Michigan, we find seashells just like this from Florida, right here in Michigan. Probably bought and paid for with Michigan maple sugar. So sugar was an important commodity. So clothing was very important. We'll talk about foods for a little bit. In Michigan, they didn't grow a lot of crops. We're still far enough north. Still some things don't grow very well here. But there are three main crops they grew. Who can name one of the three main crops? What's probably the most important one?
Apples.
They didn't grow apples. They were brought over here by the French in the 1600s. They learned to love them. But there were no apples, there were no pears here.
Squash.
Squash was one. Squash was one. Very good. What was another one?
Corn.
What was it?
Corn.
Corn was another one. And what's the third one?
Beans.
So that's type of squash. Technically, comes into squash. Beans, corn, squash. They call them the three sisters. Now, some books tell you, oh, they were so smart, they planted the beans right amongst the corn. Because it grabs nitrogen out of the air and makes the corn grow better. They didn't know anything about nitrogen. Most people in the world don't know about nitrogen today. But yes, they planted beans and corn together. Why? Because to make a garden wasn't easy. Now, I've seen pictures. I used to like National Geographic until I watched one of the more recent Native American programs. They show the Native Americans growing corn. Great big straight rows. Great big ears of corn. Here's the problem. This is modern corn. That's 800-year-old corn. This is an honest 800-year-old corn cob found out in New Mexico. So there's a big difference. But they were showing great big ears of corn. Nice straight rows. They didn't plant corn in straight rows. I mean, you can't plant corn under the shade of trees. So how do they get rid of the trees? They build a fire and kill the trees. But when you build a fire, it kills the trees. They don't fall right down. They might last for years. Don't believe me? Take a trip to northern Michigan. Go along the expressway. You'll see tree stumps there. Tree stumps from where the trees were cut down in the 1880s. The stumps are still there. So to grow corn, they built a fire, killed the trees, they let sunlight into the ground. Now you plant your corn around the dead trees. But you can't do that in a straight row. And if you do all that labor of making a garden, you're going to get as many kinds of plants in there as you can possibly grow in an area. I grow a big garden every year. I don't follow all the rules. They say plant your tomato plants 24 inches apart. Yeah, right. Well, 24 inches to me is about that far. I can get twice as many in, I get a little extra food. That might not be quite as big, it adds up though. And that's what you do. So guess what? They planted them because it saved time and space. Now, if you want a garden, you've got a hoe. Here's a garden hoe. That's a shoulder blade of a deer. That's the scapula, the shoulder blade right there. You take that, it works to cut the roots of the weeds. And that's how you hoe your garden, just like today. Now, believe it or not, the Mandan Indians of North Dakota were using these clear up to the early 1900s. The French and others that brought metal hoes and said, why you put on this big heavy metal hose? The ones we make out of shoulder blades work just fine. They're lighter. And when they wear out, we got more shoulder blades laying around. So the price was right. So that's how they make a garden hoe. And what's it wrapped on here with? Rawhide. Rawhide is kind of like electrical tape. Electrical tape, if you ever use it, stretches. You pull nice and tight, you let go, and it hangs on. Well, rawhide like this, let's see, where'd it go? You take rawhide, this is rawhide from a cow skin. It's much thicker than a deer skin. You know, it's all falling into pieces. And squirrels got into it. You soak this in water. You get it good and wet. And you ripe it as tight as you possibly can. And then guess what? You ripe it as tight as you can. When it dries, it shrinks. So it pulls it even tighter. So that's how they held their tools together, using animal skin to wrap around it. All right. So that's the garden hoe. Oh, I like fish. They like fish. Now, I always see them out west getting the big salmon up the river. Well, guess what? We didn't have salmon jump up rivers here in Michigan. In Michigan, they often went fishing with these. They're called black walnuts. I got a lot of black walnut trees growing around the neighborhoods around here. They're big green when they fall, turn black and inky. But boy, I'll tell you, that's the best tasting nut, one of the most nutritious nuts in the world. They're wonderful. and they went fishing with them. Now, when they went fishing with them, and they didn't go to big lakes, big rivers, big streams, little tiny streams. And they didn't say, hey, there's a fish, and hit them with it. That's not how they did it. They didn't take a one like this and take a fish hook. And this is a fish hook, by the way. It's called a gorge hook. In some parts of the world, they still use gorge hooks. Here's how a gorge hook works. You take, and again, it's made out of bone. You take your string, wrap it around the middle, and you shove that into a frog or a fish, whatever you want to use for bait, throw it out in the water. And we have fish that don't have manners, by the way. They're called bass. Pike. They don't chew their food. They inhale. They just inhale. One cheek. Then guess what? You yank, and that turns sideways, gets caught in the big fish's throat. Now you have yourself a fish. That works if you're using a frog or fish for bait. It doesn't work if you use a walnut. So how do you catch fish with walnuts? Well, you find a little stream. You see a whole bunch of little tiny minnows in there. You say, whoa, there's 10,000 little minnows, little guys. Let's have them for dinner. You pop a bunch of rocks and sticks over here, little dams, so they can't swim away that way. Rocks and sticks over here, they can't swim that way, now they're trapped. Then you throw the walnuts in the water. The water turns black, it looks like coffee. When that happens, all the oxygen disappears. Little fish float to the surface. Walnuts fall off the tree in the fall of the year when the water's cold. So they're not going to spoil quickly. You go back the next day, collect all the 1,000 little dead fish, you collect the walnuts. You didn't waste them. You got your walnuts, you got the little fish. In some parts of the world, they still eat little fish like this. I go to Kenya, Africa, and you'll see baskets full of little fish. And our Native Americans here used to do the same thing. In Kenya, they call these omena. I'll tell you what, you want to buy them in the United States, you can buy lobster 3 times as cheap. Okay, but they're called omena, little tiny fish. Now, in fish that size, you don't gut them, you don't scale them, you don't take the bones out. You eat everything. And somebody goes, oh, you eat everything. Yeah. And it's better for them. Now, I'm old enough where a few years ago, the doctor said, you know, you should go to the store and buy those little pills full of fish oil. That comes from the livers, the internal organs. There's certain vitamins that are in the organs that are not in the meat. If they ate just the meat of fish, they would have starved to death. They'd have died of malnutrition. They ate everything. Now today, we want good, strong bones. We always say, eat your dairy products. Well, Native Americans didn't have dairy products. They didn't have goats and cows, didn't have cheese, didn't have milk, all that kind of stuff. So where do you get your calcium from? Fish scales are made of calcium. The bones are made of calcium. And there's no time you can digest them. So by eating the whole fish, they got a balanced diet. Well, we always show them in the pictures, catch these great big fish. Yeah, they ate those. But they also ate little tiny fish. Basically, if something crawled, swam, or flew, and they could catch it, they ate it. Because surviving wasn't always easy. But those are called omena. You eat the whole thing. Nothing's been done to them other than been dried. That's it. They're just sun-dried. That's your food. No. We're talking some other things. They had games too. People like games. Anybody know what game this is? I'm missing the ball. Where'd the ball disappear to? Well, probably. I know it was here. I know it was here. Well, I thought I had it. I know I did. Oh, looks like a rock. Didn't recognize it. Hey, what game is that?
Lacrosse?
This is lacrosse. Yeah, this is lacrosse. Yeah, they had many names for it. It's tried, by the way. Now, by the way, Native Americans had games. The rules were so simple, even the French voyageurs could learn the rules. It didn't take long to learn them. There was only one rule to the game. One rule, that was all. The first team hits a goalpost with the ball 3 times wins. That's the only rule. You can do anything else you want. You want to smack something with a stick, you can hit it with a stick. They're going to hit you back. You hit him hard with a stick, he's got friends. They're going to hit you too. So how hard you got hit? Probably depends on how hard you hit them. That's the way the game was played. Now to be honest, when you have a village of just 30 people, to have enough players, both men and women played. They play with softball like this. Deerskin filled with seeds, hairs, or gravel. Stings. But that's about it. It stings a little bit. Been there, done that. But if one tribe played against another, and tribe, by the way, means nation. I think one country against another country, then the games got really serious. They didn't play with some softball like this. Oh, no, 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 no. They played with solid wooden balls. It's like taking a solid croquet ball, throwing it as hard as you can, hit the center back of the head, people died. Death was not uncommon in the game of lacrosse. Broken arms and legs were almost guaranteed. In fact, when the French first came and watched them play the game, they said, we watched the Indians play a game today. We think it is a game. We are not sure. It is so bloody it might be a war. In fact, they called it Little War. It was very common that when the game was over, the winners would look at the losers and say, guess what, losers? Pack up and move. If it don't, it will be all-out war. And everybody knew that if you lost the game of lacrosse, you would lose the war. It's how they sometimes determine who the military leaders would be. They can lead you to a championship in that game, they can lead you to a championship in the war as well. You'll lose because of your leader, you're likely to lose a war as well. So it was something determined. And usually they would move, but not always. Now, the thing was, I said there was only one rule. There were no rules about equal teams. Let's say I'm up in the peninsula, they're playing a game of lacrosse. 400 Ottawa against 200 Sioux. The 200 Sioux says, oh, that's unfair, you got twice as many players. Oh, hey, it's just the way it is. You got 400, we got 200 today. Maybe next time we got 200, that team has 100. I mean, it's just the way it is. Nobody complained. Nobody whined and complained about it. That's just the way life was. But let's say there's 400 Ottawa and 200 Sioux playing a game. I'm a Potawatomi. I paddle my birch bark canoe 300 miles. I didn't know you guys were having a game today. Wow, this is great. Can I join? Well, of course, you can always join. You're a guest. And you get to choose which team you're on. I can get a team of 400 Ottawa or a team of 200 Sioux. And they typically gambled on the games, by the way. Gambling was very popular. They gambled heavily. I get to choose which team I'm on. I'll bet my canoe, I'll bet my bow and arrow, I'll bet everything I own. We win the game. And I get to choose which team I'm on. But no matter what happens, by the way, I do want to keep my most important possession. And so with that in mind, which team do I want to join? Do I want to join the team of 400 Ottawa or team of 200 Sioux? Which team do I want to be on to keep my most important possession?
400.
400. And I lose my most important possession. There's something more important than winning that game. It's called self-respect. How could I really feel good about myself if I chose to be on a team that already had twice as many players? Come on. If 400 guys can't beat 200 guys, there's something wrong with 400 guys. And if they win, they can't brag. Oh, wow, our 400 beat their 200. So what? So you win, you still lose. You always chose to be on a smaller team. Then you keep your self-respect. Yeah, I lost my canoe, my bow and arrow, but guess what? I built them in the first place. I can build new ones. Now, as I told you earlier, I don't watch sports. But even I know about something happened a few years ago. This is a few years ago now. There was some football team, man, either down in Kentucky or Tennessee. Some little tiny college beat this place there in Ann Arbor. These gold and yellow people.
U of M.
Yeah, U of M, those guys. My understanding, some little tiny college beat them. And I don't watch sports. And even I know about that little college, a great big U of M. You always chose to be on a smaller team. Now, Native Americans had all kinds of games. Their games usually taught lessons. Now, some of them weren't as pleasant as some of the games we have today, but nonetheless, they were games. I am a biologist. One of my favorite animals are turtles. But I've been known to eat them too. Native Americans eat a lot of turtles. I mean, that's free meat. I mean, they're kind of slow, easy to catch, and to kill them. The turtles are amazing creatures. You can kill them, and you take the heart out when you're cleaning them, and they'll sit in your hand and beat. You can take a turtle heart, sit on a table, and sit there, boom, 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 boom. Do it for hours. Now, if it's cold, they last longer. If it gets too warm, they finally stop. Stop, touch them again, they beat out a couple hours. Anyway, back to the games. Native Americans had a game. It's called Turtle Hearts. Well, I don't know what they call it, but I call it Turtle Hearts. Three of us, we catch a great big old snapping turtle, great big old turtles like this. And I take the heart out. You take the heart out of your turtle. Who else wants to be in the game? Want to be in a game? All right, you take the heart out of a turtle. Okay, so all three of us, we got our hearts. Now here's the game. We all swallow the heart at the exact same time. I swallow my heart and ooh, man, I can feel it beating in there. He swallows his, he says, I can feel mine beating too. She swallows hers, she says, I can feel mine beating too. And we go on and finally he says, well, I can't feel mine anymore. Well, you lose. She finally says, well, I can't feel mine anymore. Okay, she loses. I still feel it. I'm the winner. I won today. I also won yesterday. I won the day before that. I won last week. I've been playing this game for 20 years, and guess what? I've never lost. What do you know about? What's wrong with that? What do you think is really happening?
There's a chance you could be lying.
Yeah, I'm lying. You can't win every time. I mean, sooner or later, somebody's heart's going to last longer than the one I swallowed. It's a test of honesty. You learn who to trust and who not to trust. So a lot of the games they had were who's your leader going to be? Who can you trust? Who can't you trust? So their games usually taught a lesson. Okay? And again, you grow up in the same village your entire life, they learn who to believe and who not to. So anyway, and then sometimes they did go to all-out war, and they go to war with weapons like this. See here on Style War Club, they put an arrowhead in the end like this. It makes for a very, very nasty weapon. What do they fight over? What do people from the world fight over today? Resources sometimes. Differences. They didn't all speak the same language. Sometimes people can't understand each other. There are thousands of languages literally in the Americas. Hundreds of Indian languages in North America. Somebody living over here might not understand somebody who lives just 40, 50 miles away. When you can't understand what people are saying, sometimes you get suspicious. Oh, they're talking about us. What are they planning? What are they plotting? It's just human nature, because people are people. And it shouldn't be that way, but people do. They get suspicious. Good example, I was in Kenya, Africa, and ready to fly back to the United States a few years ago. And there's a group of people, there were like 9 or 10 people there, and boy, I'll tell you what, they're all, the arms are flying, the voices were loud, they're yelling and screaming. Oh man, there's gonna be a fight. I gotta get out of here and go sit someplace else where it's gonna be a little safer. But I didn't. I'm glad I didn't. I stuck around. Next thing you know, they're laughing like crazy. They weren't upset. They're having a good time. I misinterpreted what they were doing. Well, Native Americans did the same thing. They misinterpreted sometimes the other tribes, the other languages, the other religions. There were literally hundreds of religions. They didn't all believe the same thing. Some tribes believe when you die, they bury you in the ground because that's Mother Earth. Some of the Western Indians know you put you up on a scaffold because sun gives life. So different stuff. And in the West Coast, they always seem to aim you at the setting sun. Eastern Indians tend to aim you at the rising sun. So they all had their own religions. They didn't all trust each other, they didn't always believe each other. And so sometimes there were wars. Sometimes there was wars to capture slaves. Slavery was very common amongst the Indian tribes. Every Native American tribe that I'm familiar with practiced slavery to some degree. Some groups more than others. Okay? They were just people. You gotta remember that sometimes. Over the years, we went from, gee, they were all savages, which they weren't, to perfect people, which they weren't. Somewhere in between, like the rest of us. At least me. I'm kind of in the middle somewhere. I sure ain't perfect. I'm probably not the worst person on earth either. But at the same time, we always got to think of history as being like that. Real people, real problems, and so on. Now, if you go to war, you don't want to go to war forever. So, after you fight for a while, you want a peace agreement. Well, we signed a piece of paper. They didn't have written languages. They would smoke something like this. It's called a calumet. We had a city, a peninsula called Calumet, where a peace agreement was signed by smoking one of these. We might call it a peace pipe. When you put an animal on it, we call it an effigy pipe. I carved this one a few years ago. It's made out of soapstone. Some of our Native Americans in Michigan, by the way, were known to travel 2,000 miles by canoe and walking just to get this kind of stone. Then 2,000 miles back home. It's amazing what Native Americans did to get those resources they wanted. But anyway, they want to end a disagreement, a war between nations. Here's what they do. They smoke the pipe, handed it to the next chief. And by the way, many of our tribes here, the chiefs were women. About half the tribes in Michigan were led by women. Now sometimes they had two chiefs. One was a chief when you're at peace, and then there was a chief when you're at war, which is always a man. I don't know why, it seems like now we see them fight more. But anyhow, that's what they would do. So I'd smoke the pipe. I said, I agree to stop fighting as long as you agree. I hand her, she smokes it. Okay, our two nations, we're not fighting anymore. Hand it to him. He said, no, I'm not smoking that thing. Well, guess what? We're still at war. You can leave here today, but you better hope I don't see you tomorrow. That's how the agreements were done. No paper. Honesty of what you said. Your word meant something. Now, what they smoke in here? All kinds of stuff. Yeah, when the English came, they said, what's that green bark you scrape off the tree and put in there and smoke? You know, oh, that's called kinnikinnick. And he said, what's that red bark you put in there and smoke? What's that called? Oh, that's called kinnikinnick. And they said, well, what's the gray stuff you smoke? That's called kinnikinnick. And the English got really mad. Like, you guys are lying to us. One's gray, one's green, one red. The flowers are different, the berries. Why are you lying to us? They got really upset. They had no sense of humor. The French asked him, what's the green one you're smoking? Kinnikinnick. What's the gray one? Kinnikinnick. What's the red one? Kinnikinnick. And the French said, okay, that's fine by us. They understood the Indians a little better. Native Americans didn't name every kind of plant out there. They named things for what they were used for. If you smoked it, it was called kinnikinnick. It's like saying, what'd you have for breakfast today? I had fruit. Well, that's not real precise. Native Americans weren't always real precise. Why did they need to be? Okay. If they smoked it, it was called kinnikinnick. Now, when the Native Americans were living here for hundreds of years, their lives changed drastically in the 1600s. All because of this creature right here. This is the beaver. This changed their life overnight. You want to see what it feels like by the weekend? Beaver is really good eating, by the way. It's like roast beef. Wonderful meat. Doesn't reheat very well. For some reason, when you reheat it, the flavor gets a little off. I don't know why. So you better pick out the first time or let somebody else eat it because it's not going to be good second time around. But the first time, it is really, really good. The beaver tail was considered a delicacy. It's mostly fat with a little bit of meat. It's kind of like bacon. I go to the store and I want to buy bacon. I go with the bacon with the most meat, the least fat. Native Americans, by the way, were the opposite. They would choose the most fat, least meat. Why? Because fat has more energy than any other kind of food you can possibly eat. And so getting enough energy was their goal. And that's why the tail was such a delicacy. But how did this animal change their life? Trade. When the French came, they wanted furs for beaver hats. Felt hats, by the way. And when the French wanted these, the Indians got paid more if they'd used the skin first. If an Indian wore a beaver skin for 2 or 3 years, he got paid 2 or 3 times as much for it as he would a brand new one. Because when the Indians wore these, they didn't wear them like this. When they wore these skins this way. And the long hairs were up against their skin, and they fell off, and the French didn't want them. All they wanted was their short hairs. So they were willing to pay extra for that. And when they wore it this way, they also preserved it with something. They preserved it with bear fat. So because they put fat in here to preserve it, because it was worn, and the long hairs had fallen off, they got paid extra for it. Native Americans used beaver skins basically for money, from the 1600s to the 1800s. Here, French guy, have my old used nasty heavy beaver skin and give me something in return. And what they got in return changed their life forever. First thing every Native American wanted to buy, cloth. Deer skin might look nice in the movies, it's not as comfortable as cloth. And there's another problem. Deer skins only come in 3 basic colors. Deer skins for your clothes, they come in brown, brown, or brown. Take your pick. You're in shades, but it's brown. Native Americans, like everybody else in the world today, we like pretty things. They like pretty things, they bought it with beaver skins. Cloth was the #1 trade item when the French showed up. And now, they're no longer, the village size is no longer limited by how many deer live in the forest. You can buy your clothes. You get that crazy French guy, some beaver skins, you get cloth. Give that French guy a basket like this full of maple sugar, buy cloth. Give the French guy fish to eat, buy cloth. Now they can trade for their clothing. And because of that, they got to living in large villages. 2, 3, 400 instead of 20 or 30. But there's a problem. If you live in a village of 20 or 30, you can survive by gathering fruits, nuts, and berries and growing the food crops. When you live in a village of 300, 400 people, you can't do that. Man, you eat all the berries in just a day or two. So you better start growing more crops. Once the French came, their life changed. They became more sedentary, staying in one spot, growing larger crops. And extra crops, what do? Sell that to the French, buy even more stuff you want. So life changed overnight when the French showed up in the 1600s. All because the French wanted the beaver skins. All right. I'm sure there's some things, well, there are some things I didn't talk about. These tools, by the way. I said these were tools, these were knives. This one I've used several times in cleaning deer skins. First time I used it, I thought, well, I'll use it just to tell people I did it. Then I'll go back to my metal knife. That'll work better. This works better than a metal knife. Metal knives are so sharp that sometimes got a hole in the hide. Then you got to repair that. This is rough enough to scrape all the fat off the stuff you don't want, but not sharp enough to get a hole through the hide. So it's actually a better knife. I've used on 6 or 7 deer at least. Okay. Now this is a knife I found up north end of Hudson Bay. Now some people say, well, you're out there, there's thousands of rocks, maybe millions of rocks. And how did I know that was a tool? I mean, it looks like a broken rock. Here's what scientists look for. I noticed when I was out exploring up there, this rock had been broken from this side more than once. Broken from this side more than once. Nature almost never breaks a rock from both sides, and definitely not more than once. Falls off a mountainside, breaks the other side, but it can't keep doing it over and over. So repeated breaks from both sides tells it's a tool, or something some human made, maybe threw away, scrap material. But humans had their hands on it. That is what scientists look for. Now sometimes we find hundreds of tools all in one place. This arrowhead I found in my garden when I was working one day. I always was suspicious they might have camped around my place, because not that far from the river. You always have to live by water. Always. The river was nearby, they had a camp nearby. So I got down my garden one day. But sometimes we find 300, 400 of these all in a pile. It's like, what? How did we lose so many tools? They didn't lose them. Our Native Americans usually move 3 or 4 times a year before the French and that showed up. Who wants to haul around a bunch of heavy rocks? Yeah, I'll take a pocket full of them with me when we go. We come back next year, I'll dig them back up, I know where I hid them. Well, for some reason they didn't return. Maybe some other tribe moved into the area. The guy died. They decided to live someplace else. So we sometimes find piles of these where they buried them and didn't come back and retrieve them. Now, there's a lot of places to look around on the rivers. So how do you know where to even look to try finding things? By the highways. Where do we build our gas station and stores? The busiest roads, don't we? Where 2 roads come together at an intersection, that's where the gas station is, that's where the grocery store is, because we all need to go to the same place. Well, back then the highways were the rivers. So guess what, when 2 rivers came together, they're going to live near there. 3 big rivers coming together, definitely going to be living in there. That way you can travel in all different kinds of directions and come down to one spot. And by the way, they were smart enough to do what a lot of Americans aren't doing now. I'll tell you what they did. They were smart enough not to build a house right down next to the river. Because guess what? You build your house down next to the river, it floods. We see that on the news all the time, don't we? When we rebuild, the next 5 years later, it floods again. Duh. Native Americans knew not to do that. They might have some small structures down by the river, but the real village is up on the hill overlooking the river, above the floodplain. So you can always tell where Indian villages were. 3 rivers come together, high place above, that's where it was, but they did a lot of work down by the river. Okay. Now, what else do I have? Oh, some things have changed, unfortunately, over the years. This basket is made out of black ash. An ash tree is a hardwood tree. You build a fire on the bottom of it, knock out the burnt wood, build a fire, knock out the burnt wood until it falls down. Then you beat on the tree with rocks. And the growth rings separate into thin layers. And that's how they separate the wood into this. They didn't have saws to do this kind of stuff. They separated by beating on it. The problem is, In recent years, an insect was introduced to North America called the emerald ash borer. It's killing the ash trees. Native Americans have been doing this for hundreds upon hundreds of years. Now, the trees are dying from a disease that's being spread by an insect brought from other parts of the world. So a tradition they've been doing for 100 years may disappear, all because of insects being brought to North America. Their canoes were made out of this stuff right here, birch bark. And by the way, our natives in Michigan had an advantage over Indians to the south where the birch trees don't live. Birch bark gives you a nice light canoe, easily lifted and carried from one place to another. When you make dugout canoes out of logs, too heavy to carry. So our Native Americans make bigger canoes, haul more cargo, travel faster, further, and carry more. But I don't know how many pictures of birch bark canoes I've seen where the canoes were white. There were no white birch bark canoes. If you say, oh, but birch trees are white. Yep, on the outside. On the inside, they're brown. When you take the bark off a birch tree, it curls up with the brown to the outside. Why fight what nature naturally does? So their canoes are actually brown. And when I heard about birch bark canoes when I was growing up, I thought, how do you make a canoe from this stuff? It's like cardboard. You step inside, you'll fall right through. They didn't just make it out of birch bark. They put wood on the inside. A very special tree that only grows in southern Canada and northern United States. White cedar. It's the lightest tree in the forest. It can be wet for 50 years and not rot. I have fence posts that were 100 years old. They finally fell down after being in the ground for 100 years. So, again, it splits into thin layers. They put layers of cedar on the inside, birch bark on the outside. But then how do you hook it together? Tree roots. They sewed it together with Christmas tree roots. But to keep from leaking, what do? Oh, just bear fat keeps showing up, doesn't it? Yeah, you mix bear fat with Christmas tree sap, put that on the outside, it keeps your canoe from leaking. So they had an amazing canoe here in Michigan made out of birch bark. Now, I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you'll learn some things today. We definitely did not cover everything. I sometimes feel this program is 10 million things to talk about. We talk about a dozen. Anybody have questions they'd like to know about the Native Americans that were living here? Something I didn't cover? Or something I didn't cover clearly? You have a question? Go ahead and answer your question. I don't bite very often. Or very hard. But I've been known to. No questions. That's too easy. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned some things. And here's the key thing. When you're studying history, doesn't matter where you're studying about, what group of people you're studying about, remember this. People are people. I don't care where you live or when you live. Okay? None of us are perfect. They weren't perfect either. Just people trying to survive. Hope you enjoyed it. Enjoy some of the other programs the library has. You finally have a question. Yes?
Do you cover the meat that goes into the lake?
No. You just drop it down into the lake. Yep. It's amazing how things can last down there. I learned about bog lakes when I was in high school. I grew up in northern Michigan. A beautiful bog, beautiful lake, all trees all around, just like a mirror. Nobody ever went to it because it was hard to get to. Wow, nobody ever fishes this lake. There's got to be some big fish in there. Guess what? I fished and fished and fished, never caught a thing. Remember I said bog lakes don't have oxygen in them? No oxygen, no fish. Some of the most beautiful lakes in the world have no fish because there's no oxygen. And the Indians knew about that. I didn't when I was a teenager. I thought, wow, beautiful lake, all private, all mine. I could have starved back there. I did learn to hunt like Native Americans do. I hunt deer. And I have learned some tricks from hunting. Remember I said they took like 1,000 deer a year? How do you kill 1,000 deer in a year? It's only 30 of them. They didn't have guns. There were actually fewer deer back then. So how do you do it? Well, here's what they would do. First they'd build a fence maybe out of sticks. You get a big fence out of sticks here, and there's a fence out of sticks here, and leave an opening. And what you do, you chase the deer. A bunch of guys line up over there and they be chasing deer, and deer gonna run this way, and deer find the fence, and they don't want to jump over it, they follow it, and deer find this fence, and they follow it, and they find an opening, go through the opening. Guess on the other side of the opening? Hunters. Native Americans 8,000 years ago, about 7,000 or 8,000 years ago in northern Michigan, actually built a fence. At that time, Lake Huron was so shallow, it was like a giant river. It wasn't a big lake. There was a river that came. By Alpena, I grew up in Alpena, northeastern Michigan up here. They built a fence out of rocks clear over to Ontario, the other side of Lake Huron. We're talking over 100 miles long with openings in it. And they had openings, they had corrals on the other side, so you chase, in this case it was caribou, they were chasing caribou through them. On the other side there were corrals. When the animals got in there, they blocked it and they were trapped. And there were guys hiding inside little blinds made out of rocks. So I learned that building a fence is a good way to hunt deer. Now I have 15 acres of property, that's not a lot of property for hunting deer. I get 12 deer every year. I learned some of the techniques that the Native Americans used. So understanding history and other cultures has benefited me personally because I know how to hunt when hunting can be tough sometimes. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for coming. You've been great. Appreciate it. Did you have fun too? I hope so. All right, thanks so much. You guys have a good one. If you want to look at stuff up here, you're welcome to look at things. You want to put it away. Here. Want to do something? Want to touch this? You can see what this feels like. Think about it. You don't pull on it. Touch it very, very gently. It's just 10, 12,000 years old. You're touching something that's human. Just take yourself touch 10, 12,000 years ago. Think about it. That's a long time, isn't it? Yeah, and they probably had for dinner. So, oh, I forgot to show you my musical instrument too, by the way. Rattle, made on deer hooves. When the French came with brass bells, they switched to brass bells. They're shiny, new. I like some of these better. But like all humans, people like new things. Gotta have a new bicycle, the old one's so worth. No. And guess what? Something like old is better. So anyway. My brother killed a bear many years ago. And bears had lasted a long time. So if you get a 250-pound bear, you get about 50 or 60 pounds of fat. About 1/4 of the weight in the fall is fat. So you can get a lot of fat from it. And again, at one time there were actually more bears in Michigan than there were deer. Because bears do like old forests, and we had old forests back then. When the British were building a fort over on the western side of the state, the British soldiers were complaining, you don't stop feeding us this bear meat, we're going on strike basically. We're tired of eating it. It's good, it's day after day. But yeah, there were bear everywhere. But a lot less deer. Now, these are different bead work. When the English and French came, they brought glass beads. Before that, they used seeds, porcupine quills, and things like that. Those are really hard to work with. They're beautiful, but a lot of work. So when the French came with glass beads, like, wow, man, these already got holes in them. They're already pre-made. Life got a whole lot easier. And they actually have to live longer, too. Is the reason. One of the favorite colors for Indians in our area was red beads. To turn a porcupine quill red, you had to soak it in a plant juice. The problem is the plant juice that turned it red had a chemical they call arsenic, which is a poison. Little arsenic never hurt anybody. A lot of arsenic will kill you. Like some medicines, the right amount's okay. We use arsenic for medicine. But too much, deadly. Well, the women chew on it. Some this year, some next year, year after year. But arsenic never leaves your body. So over the years, they got so much arsenic they would die from arsenic poisoning. They didn't know why. Then you get to a certain age, you tend to get ill. When the French brought the glass beads, they didn't have to chew on the porcupine quills anymore. They flattened them, and therefore didn't swallow the poison. So something as simple as glass beads allow them to live longer. It's amazing how little things change life. Then they dry them out. They lay them out on the rocks in the sun. And they lay them out on the rocks in the sun. Yeah, they're just little tiny fish. That's all they are. But when I go to Kenya, I'll see baskets of them out alongside the roads. Sometimes they're dust covered too. You gotta watch for many of the roads there. But anyway, that is called a mena. I eat them, they're okay. I don't know, it's just not my favorite flavor. It's not the thought of what's in them, that doesn't bother me. It's just not my favorite flavor. But my wife, on the other hand, she loves them because she grew up eating them in Kenya. So, that's just corn cob that's 800 years old.